What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Facts on the Ground. I am Misty Winston, joined by my co-host Jesse Zerwell. Today we have a very special guest. I could seriously probably talk for about 5 minutes about all the things that she does. She's a writer and an activist and an organizer and an author and a journalist and a filmmaker. And I mean, she wears a lot of hats. But today we're going to be talking to her about her new album, which is called No Solo. So thank you very much, Eleanor Goldfield, for joining us on Facts on the Ground. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I bought the album today and I listened to it, and it's amazing. I love music. Jesse, we've interviewed a couple of musicians, and I tend to fangirl, so I'm going to apologize in advance because I do love music and I get excited about new music. So I got the album today, and it's really powerful and kind of raw. What was it? Just what was kind of, I don't even know if it's like, what was your inspiration, but what was your process like in writing this album? I mean, it's your first solo album. What was the process like for you?
Yeah, so the process was a lot different because I've been in bands basically since I moved to LA when I was 18. And so to be on my own in that space was kind of scary at first because you don't have anybody to turn to and be like, hey man, what do you think? But it was also really powerful in a sense because I realized that there's a crutch there when, particularly when you're working with people that are more experienced musicians than you. And the people that I worked with that were a part of my band were like master musicians. So I kind of stepped back from a lot of the musical side of things and focused more on the lyrics. I mean, I wrote all the lyrics, and the vocal melodies, but I realized, I can actually step in to write music. Like that's something that I can do, even though I know like 6 chords. I'm certainly no guitarist, but that's okay. And so kind of like the process was kind of a lot of unpacking of like what happened with the band, and a lot of what happened with myself as an artist after the band. And yeah, and so that, as well as recognizing that I can put spoken word and music in the same space, that I'm allowed to do that. And this was especially intense for me because I worked in the music industry in LA as well as tried to become a part of it. I worked as a studio technician at recording studios in LA. So I knew the whole thing. Well, you have to pick a genre, and you can't just say that it sounds different. Like that's not good enough, and it has to be da 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 da. And so having that programming it felt really good to buck that and be like, you know what? No, I don't really care. So I'm just going to go ahead and put spoken word and music on the same EP, and if you don't like it, don't listen to it. So the process was a lot of like the kind of cha-cha of can I do this? Oh, I can do this. Yeah, let's do this. And unpacking that experience as an artist. And then of course, just stepping into that really overt political space that I've written in for a really long time, but doing that more so on my own for the first time.
Yeah, one of my friends who's a novelist who I believe still lives in LA, he said to me once, giving me advice about writing, that you should try to say or make it a point to say something that people know or understand, but always try to say it in a new way that makes it more impactful. So I definitely think that applies to your approach to this record. And there are no rules. You can make it however you want. You can write a poetry collection, for example, like poetry is my jam. And you can have prose poems that are perfectly punctuated next to free verse poems that don't even capitalize letters. So there really are no rules to it, but there are lots of people out there who will try to tell you that they're
try to enforce rules.
Yeah, like there's only one way to do it. Yeah.
Yes, it is very compartmentalized. They like to put everybody in a box, which is really unfortunate. We were talking briefly earlier about our friend Jesse Jett, and he does the same stuff. He puts spoken word stuff in with music, and I mean, I love that because you aren't really tied down to one genre. Like what the same thing I said to Jesse Jett, I'll say to you. There isn't like a genre. I can't, like, if somebody said, "What does Eleanor Goldfield sound like?" I'd be like, well, a lot of things, like there's a little bit of everything.
Herself.
Yeah. Which, I mean, I know sounds like kind of a cop out answer, but it's just the truth. It's, you know, you can't really put it into a box. So yeah, one of the spoken word pieces is actually extremely raw. A Shrugging Dune. The lyrics in that are seriously one of the best lines. In the age of anxiety, how old is too young to rest? Oh, I got cold chills. Like when I heard that, I was like, wow, that's, you know, like that's a really powerful line. So do you start with words first? Or do you have like a beat in your head? What's your like writing process like? I'm always interested in like what somebody's like inner mind frame is like when they're writing, just as a writer myself.
Yeah, I'd say just to one of the, you know, the point that y'all brought up, I think one of the most hilarious experiences in my 10, 11 years working in studios is how they made it a commodification, and they normalized being abnormal. Like, you know, it's like the hot topic, right? Oh, well, we're alternative. No, because now it's corporatized, so it's not actually underground and alternative. And, you know, how the music industry takes good ideas and spits them out as these perfectly cookie cutter and ultimately pretty boring concepts.
Yeah. Insufferably boring.
Yeah, absolutely. And just watching some artists come through the studio with really cool sounds and then leaving the studio with crap and just, you know, stuff that I'd heard a million times, and seeing a little bit of their soul that died on the way out. And I was like, whatever I can do to never be that would be great. So yeah, I think, and this is something that, you know, I experienced quite a bit in LA, like having meetings with record execs and things, and them saying that, you know, I needed bigger boobs and needed to write love songs, and realizing that I was like the only, particularly as a woman in Hollywood, having to weigh your morals and your dreams, and then realizing that you might just have to bury your dreams unless you're willing to play them, you're willing to conform them to their, you know, their cookie cutter paradigm, in which case they're not your dreams
Your
anymore.
rubric.
Anyway. Yeah.
The rubric of what constitutes successful, or
It really is like an assembly line.
yeah.
Totally.
You know, it is very mass produced and
yeah, and
yeah, it's not great.
And it's very obvious in pop music, the pop music that's sort of foisted upon us. Like, not only do you have to listen to this, but you have to like it. Like, you feel like Taylor Swift, you know? And it's Taylor Swift fucking sucks. I'm sorry if anybody watching this, or
oh, Jesse, you're gonna get some Swifties after you, homie.
either of you like Taylor Swift, but that's what I'm talking about. And I think speaks to Eleanor's point about this cookie cutter commodification of music, and it's only accelerating. And with platforms like Spotify, where you have everything at your fingertips, it's a good thing, but it also makes it harder because you have to sort of parse to find the good stuff. And
well, and doesn't Spotify treat their artists like crap? Like,
yes,
isn't that right? Yeah, they're the bad one, right? Because I always use Bandcamp.
Yeah, Bandcamp, I think, is better. I'm not too well versed on that. I should be better, but yeah, with Spotify, at least you almost have to rely, unless you're going to do the digging yourself, you almost have to rely on their algorithm to find new stuff for you that you might like. And that's just, you know, I grew up listening to cassette tapes before anything else. Actually, the first music I listened to was on vinyl, which my parents played. One of those songs being Dire Straits' Walk of Life, which is still near and dear to my heart. But now it's so far from that, and it's kind of depressing because the pace keeps accelerating, and you can't really sit with a record and immerse yourself in it anymore.
Well, people don't even buy full albums anymore. They buy songs.
Right.
You know, it's not about the experience, because an album used to be an experience, you know, it used to be like an entire experience, a whole story. And now it's just individual songs and whatever's trending on, what's that thing called? Damn it. I'm such a boomer. God damn it.
I am too. I don't know any of the
what's the TikTok? TikTok.
Yeah,
My kid
that's a thing people do.
Yeah, that's a thing people do. Which, listen, I get it. TikTok, it's fine if you're on TikTok, do your thing. But the TikTok, I think, has ruined music in a huge way. I think that's been a huge accelerating factor. Like Jesse was saying, it's moving faster. I think TikTok is now. I don't think artists create music to create music. They create music to be like the trending song on TikTok. Just whatever is
I do
popular.
think that there's like, because there's always the pendulum swinging the other way, right? I do think there's some pushback, just from working in studios, just from when I started when I was 18 to when I left when I was 28. There was a lot more requests for tape machines, and I worked in places that had tape machines, and so we went from aligning tape machines maybe like once a week or a couple of times a month to aligning them almost every day. And so I will say that more and more people are appreciating, at least in terms of the process of recording, the slower is better, and take your time and sit with it and marinate in your ideas, as opposed, and of course there are still the people who come in and they're like, yeah, we're going to write for 2 hours and then we're done and this is Beyonce's new hit or whatever. But there's definitely people that are interested in the slower process. And I understand that I live in a bubble, both in terms of the adults and the kids that I hang out with. But some of the kids that I've hung out with are interested in vinyl. And I find myself finding people to nerd out with that are like half my age. And I'm like, oh yeah, let me talk to you about analog, and like totally doing the gear nerd thing. And, actually appreciating an album and going to the vinyl and like flipping it over. And, and so I think there is some of that happening. And, I think some of it is just to be trendy, but I do think there are folks out there that actually appreciate the sound quality of analog over digital. And so I guess I'm forever hopeful, at least, of like the actual underground of music or art in general. But yeah, the mainstream and the corporatized, just like the corporatized of anything, is atrocious.
Capitalism destroys everything. It ruins everything. It really does. It's just a ruiner.
Yeah, and to speak to what you just said about flipping the record over, for example, music.
My dad used to let me do that when I was a kid, and I used to love it so much.
So I'm 38, and like I said, I grew up listening to vinyl and cassettes, and there was a tactile aspect to listening to music. It wasn't just you were listening, again, like you have to flip over the record or flip the tape over. Or if you're making a mixtape, I used to have this really old radio that my parents gave me, and I would listen to, I think it was 101.1 all the time when they actually used to play oldies, like doo-wop. And I would sit there, and when a song came on, I
start recording really fast.
Yeah. And that's totally gone now. And and I'm not saying that just for the sake of sentimentality, but because I think it degrades the experience of music in a way. Not the quality of music that's being produced, because there are still really good musicians putting really good stuff out there. Case in point. So, but there is something to be said about that and how it links to commodification and capitalism and this need to have everything right now.
Absolutely.
Yes. Instant gratification is, and I'm guilty of it. I'm not going to pretend like I'm not. I'm guilty of like enjoying instant gratification, like being able to just, at the drop of or just like the click of a button, be able to have whatever song I want. Like, that's amazing. That's great. But you're right. There is a little bit taken away of the whole experience of like even just going to the record store. You guys remember that? Like the NRMs and stuff? That was fun. We used to do that after school. Like we would, all pile in my car after high school, and we'd drive to the mall, and we'd go in the record store, and we'd all find out which, whatever CDs that we were getting or whatever. And it was a whole thing. And now that's a little bit lost, which, I mean, I guess we're lamenting. I mean, it's like pros and cons. So, yeah, but it is a little bit weird. Capitalism does kind of ruin everything.
It really does. And well, really, and I mean, the music industry the music industry definitely made it a point to avoid investing in anything different. You'd read, like, I loved reading about like when the Doors became famous, or Guns N' Roses, or Jimi Hendrix. And it's like, they chose them because they were different. And I was like, oh, cool. And then I moved to LA and I was like, wait, why does everyone hate the different stuff? When did this change? And so it became like a concerted effort to avoid the different. And so that, the music and the film industry does the same thing. So it's not like the music industry is alone in that, but it was very much like a decision that was made to no longer take chances on somebody that sounded unlike what was already popular. So
they found a formula, it seems, and they're like, this will definitely make us money, so we're going to just redo this 12 times and milk it for everything that it's worth. And there's no attempt at creativity or thinking outside the box. It's just reproduced nonsense over and over and over again, for the sake of profit. Yeah, that is really depressing when you say it like that, actually. That made me really sad.
I'm that person at the party that like ends up sitting alone in the corner because no one wants to talk about the downfall of capitalism with me.
Well, if we ever party, I'll be in the corner with you and we can have
yes. Well, actually, there's a line where you are also familiar with Krish Mohan. We love Krish. I adore him. I think he's got a line in one of his albums where he says, I'm the guy in the corner at the party with like the Noam Chomsky book or whatever, like arguing about imperialism. And yes, those are my people.
Totally. Yes, corner people.
Those are 100% my people.
But I just wanted to say that I know LA and Hollywood in particular get a bad rap, and usually rightfully so, but there are a lot of good musicians based in LA. Phoebe Bridgers, Kevin Morby, who's the other one I'm blanking on? Ariel Pink is great. There are a lot of really good independent musicians in LA and in the Hollywood area. And I don't think that people should give short shrift to LA or Hollywood with regard to music just because of the reputation that we all.
Oh no, definitely. And I know a lot of amazing musicians that are still based in Hollywood. I just recently moved from there. So I would have considered myself one of them. And I wouldn't expect people to hate me just because I live in the shadow of, the seat of empire in DC. So just because you happen to live in a place that sucks ass with regard to capitalist endeavors or imperialist endeavors certainly shouldn't overshadow your capabilities as an artist or organizer or what have you.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Jesse. I'm sorry.
Eleanor, I wanted to ask you about the title of your most recent EP, No Solo.
Ask that too.
Yeah. and you don't have to, I'm not asking you to fully explain it or, put it under a microscope, just unless you want to, but I'm just really curious, being interested in words, as we mentioned before, where it comes from.
Yeah, well, I totally opened myself up to that question by naming it that. So, that's on me. Yeah, and just to respond to Misty's question earlier, my workflow is just all of the things. I get an idea in the shower, and then I almost break my ass trying to get my phone to record it into my phone in time. I get an idea at 4 a.m. when I wake up, and I'm like, oh, I gotta write that down. So yeah, there's like this beautiful idea of like somebody sitting down and being like, now I'm going to be creative. That has never happened to me ever. But yeah, so the name actually came from the recognition that you never actually do anything by yourself. And this comes a lot from my work as an organizer and the work of building community and collectives. And even though it was my first time sitting in a studio by myself without a band around me, there was the engineer and the producer, which basically engineers and producers are kind of like therapists, or not even kind of, they are. So, he's there. And then I have, another friend that played lead guitar on the songs, who was there, also throwing out ideas. I had so many people around me that weren't in the studio, but were inspiring me and kind of cheering me on and say, like, this is so cool that you're doing this. So I wasn't alone in that space, even though I was physically alone. And it also, of course, speaks to, what I mentioned, that even if you're alone in front of like a line of cops or a line of pipeline workers or whatever, you're not really alone. there are thousands of people with you that are supporting you, that are in solidarity with you. And so no matter how shitty and lonely things feel in those spaces of either creating worlds or creating art, you are not actually ever alone.
Yeah, I love that.
Good point. It's a very good
I love
point.
that, because it really is true. I mean, a lot of people like to think that, you know, somebody like a Jeff Bezos or something deserves what he's done because he's worked so hard. No, even if he somehow accumulated that mass amount of wealth without like exploiting people hand over fist, he still is standing on the backs of everybody that's ever come before him. You know, he hasn't designed and invented and built, and you know, we are all standing on the backs of millions of our ancestors who have come before us and got things started. No one person could ever do this on their own, you know?
And I know I was looking sideways, but I wanted to pull up this quote from the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley. And it's, well, this is just part of it. Hold on. This stupid Facebook ad just came up. Rise like lions after slumber, in unvanquishable number, shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few. And that's from his book called The Mask of Anarchy, or the poem called The Mask of Anarchy, written on occasion of the massacre at Manchester. So
it's a beautiful piece.
Just to speak to what
Jeremy
we were
Corbyn
talking
once
about,
quoted that at a festival.
Not being alone. Oh, did he?
That was when I was like, okay, Jeremy Corbyn. You know, that was, oh, all right. I see you. Yeah. He's still not, you know, perfect, but that was cool. That was a pretty cool move on his part, I will say.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that piece.
Yeah. And I think that it really does. That's kind of the same philosophy we're talking about here, is everything's interconnected, and we are many, you know, nobody walks this alone.
So what is your writing process like? I know we talked about this a little bit earlier, but are you mostly down with the words or the melodies or both? Or I don't know how to ask that, because I've been in a band before, and it's
kind of like one of those questions that there is no real way to ask it.
It's been both sides for me, and I think that's sort of the norm, if you will, for musicians. But I'm just curious what usually sparks your creative process, as cliche as that sounds.
Yeah, so again, like my muses are really finicky, and they come whenever the hell they feel like it. They're definitely on artist time. But I'd say, like, for music and I have always had an odd relationship, because I always wanted to be a musician. Like, a part of me wanted to be a musician, but then another part of me was like, I started singing when I was 4. I was a classically trained opera singer, so my voice was always my instrument. And I always get mad when people are like, that's not an instrument. And I'm like, oh yeah, well then you hit like a soprano notes.
That's like something Ben Shapiro would say.
Do you
remember when he came out with a tweet, or like a series of tweets, about how hip hop is not actually music, because this is what consists of music? And then he listed like something his father told him about what are supposed to be the points you have to hit, or the
I feel like he has to be Andy Kaufman. You know, he has to be. Like, there's no way that's real.
He's just a fucking jerk off, and people keep giving him attention and a platform, and that's why he's still kicking around. But one day I think we're all going to look back and be ashamed and laughing that we ever gave him any attention. But anyway,
there are too many people like that. But they give it's like the Jordan Peterson thing. It's like they give solace to particularly white men who feel like they've lost something, and they're not sure where they put it, but they're pretty sure that it's women and Black people's fault. And and then you have someone like Jordan Peterson who just makes it sound really eloquent and philosophical. But yeah, I mean, I'd say that, like, the way that I've typically written songs is that I usually just sit down with the guitar, and we'll hang out for a bit, and I might play a cover or two. And because we have a bit of a, I'm like staring at her right now. We have this love-hate relationship. It's like the cliche that you see in a Lifetime movie. Like that's our relationship. And so I sit with her for a bit, and then something might fall out. Something might not. It might just be that I sit there and play Tom Petty for an hour. But something might fall out, and then it happens pretty quickly. Just like with a spoken word, I'll start strumming something and start singing and humming, and words will come. And that's how I wrote the songs that are on the album. They kind of just fell out of me, which is typically how it happens. I don't, especially with the spoken word, I never go back and edit, because I feel like whatever's there is what's there, and that's what fell out.
I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, that's how I write
revision.
too. Yeah, because Jesse and I have had this conversation with a couple different people, and he's a revisionist. Mm-hmm. I am not. I like whatever comes out first. That's what it is.
Takes me a month to write one poem.
And I so appreciate that, because that's how I am with music. Because with music, it's more structured in the sense that, okay, well, the cadence has to fit with, the rhythm of the song, and it has to fit with, like, okay, well, if the chorus is this, and so with that, I definitely revise, and I'm like, well, that's the 3-syllable word. That doesn't work there.
Right.
But like with
poems, you're thinking about this stuff when you're out like grocery shopping. You're
totally.
Totally. That syntax doesn't quite make sense.
Right.
Yeah.
But with the poems, I really, and I think this is why I like spoken word, because, kind of like what you were saying earlier, Jesse, is like you can just let that shit fall out, and it doesn't matter if, every line rhymes, or if it's in like sonnet format or whatever the hell. It can really just fall out of you however it falls out of you. And so that, I want it to be that way. I want it to be that raw and real, and that snapshot of exactly where I was at that particular moment, thinking what I was thinking. And then with the music, even though it falls out of me like that, I will go back and revise and be like, actually, that word doesn't work, and I'll put this one there instead. But in particular, the music and the vocal melodies are, once they fall out of me, they're pretty much there. And part of that is because I don't like revising. Part of it is because I'm just not a good enough guitar player.
Fair. That's
Don't
fair.
be so hard on yourself.
No, I get that. Yeah. Okay. But okay, so in Outlaw, which I love, the line is, I didn't want to be an outlaw, but you made me. And I'm curious, and I know that a lot of people who write songs, and maybe you're one of these people, don't really like to explain their lyrics too in depth. I don't know how you feel about that. I think some people are weird about it. Like, I know Trent Reznor's weird about it. But is that like a more general commentary on everything, like yourself and society and the government? And is that who's making you, or is it like, is there one specific thing there? You know what I mean? Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's definitely all of the above, and I always love hearing how people relate to it. For me, one of the things that was the impetus for that song was that there was a warrant out for my arrest in Louisiana because I was standing on an easement. And
how dare you?
I know. Yeah. I was down there.
Wait, you were standing? You were actually standing on it?
Standing on it. Pretty sure if I was squatting, it would have been fine. So Louisiana has passed these laws, the critical infrastructure law, where whatever you're doing around a fossil fuel infrastructure project is then therefore amplified, however many times, because God bless oil. And so there was a warrant out for my arrest because, as part of the protest, we were standing there basically to observe and to bear witness to what was happening on it was actually private property that the pipeline company was like, nah, that's ours.
Which pipeline?
The Bayou Bridge pipeline.
Okay.
Which is the tail end of DAPL down in Louisiana. And the camp that was combating it, that is now like a wonderful food forest and a totally badass indigenous-led like regenerative farming effort, is called L'eau est la vie camp, which is water is life in French. But so it stemmed from that, and it wasn't the first time that like I'd found myself against the law, but it was such like a stark and perfect and overt example of like, wow, if you actually give a shit about a livable future and human rights, you're an outlaw, like you're illegal. How fucked is that? And it's not like I never, I mean, I wasn't like a good kid, but I wasn't like a bad kid that broke rules just for shits and giggles. I was like, I like when I was a kid, I didn't want to be an outlaw. Like I didn't think that I would grow up to be someone who had like warrants out for them. It was, and yet here I am as like somebody who, you know, has been arrested and has found themselves in the crosshairs of, you know, the state for giving a shit.
Yeah.
And of course,
Right.
I'm not alone. And so I wanted, just like I think music is in general, it's not just for the person writing it. It's a call out to people who feel the same way. And so this, you know, outlaw is just as much me processing that realization and that, oh, I guess that's what I am now, as much as a call out to people like, hey, this is you too. And that's okay, because this is the only way that we can actually save ourselves and
Yes.
manifest a livable future is to become illegal. And that's where we're at. So
Become ungovernable.
right.
And I love that you end the song with, "Are you going to be an outlaw?" I love that. Like it is like it's like a call to action. It's like a challenge. And I love that. You know, I love music that like puts out a challenge too, you know?
Thank you.
It's great.
And we sort of piggybacking off of that, we often hear, or we often have to deal with the whining of people who say that musicians or actors even should not be involved in politics. They should keep their mouths shut. They're just entertainers. We've seen it with the Take a Knee movement.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just play your football and
Play your sports ball.
Yeah,
Shut
up and play your football. You don't have it so bad. Black people are getting murdered in the streets by cops, but hey, your life is good. And you shouldn't use your privilege to protest that. So a lot of that goes for musicians too, that they should sort of keep their minds and mouths out of politics. And I'm wondering what you have to say about that, which I think I already know the answer to, but also if you've received any pushback for making music that has a political conscience to it
and isn't cookie cutter.
And yes.
Yes. First of all, I've always found it funny when people say that, because I'm like, so who is allowed to get into politics?
Right.
Just the politicians? Because I think that's the problem.
Yes.
And it reminds me of something that a former coal miner said to me when I was down in West Virginia. And he was like, I don't mean to be mean, but if you say you don't get involved in politics, that's fucking stupid. Because if you don't, there's somebody who believes in the exact opposite of everything you believe in, who's going to fight for that in your stead.
Right.
And I just like, it's so fascinating to me that that kind of pop culture has created this space where, oh, it's, you know, it's not cool, or it's not appropriate for the average person to be involved with politics, when it's like, that is exactly what politics should be, because everything you do is political. The fact that I woke up in an apartment that has air conditioning today, the fact that I walked on a public sidewalk, the fact that I threw out my trash, like every single thing that you do is political. So I always found that part.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to put this into what you're saying. James Baldwin once said, and it's great, that I don't have the privilege of not living the material reality that everything is political.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah.
Please continue. I just wanted to add that in there.
No, anytime you want to interrupt with a James Baldwin quote, it's
it's a pretty good reason to interrupt. Yeah, I'll give it to you.
But yeah, it's absolutely true. It's a privilege to be apathetic. And I also agree with Rollo May, who said that apathy is cowardice. And you know, the ability or the interest in being absolutely outside of something speaks to a privilege and a cowardice that is not cool. And yet somehow we've flipped it the other way. I mean, I remember I worked in a pretty big recording studio in LA, and there was a celebrity that was going to have their picture taken with my boss and the engineer, and there was a Rolling Stone magazine, and it had Obama on it. And the celebrity's manager says, wait, let's just take this out of the frame just in case. And I was standing there like, just in case what? People don't believe Obama exists? Like, I don't fucking understand like what that is supposed to mean. Like,
right.
But the intense fear of there being any sort of political connection, even though this person had been famous since like the 70s. So you couldn't really hurt his career at this point. But even still, the fear of it being somehow construed as a political picture. And this is how Hollywood was. I mean, I had several meetings with record execs that sounded like they were reading off the same script, like it was MSNBC and CNN or something. Like, you need bigger tits, you need to write love songs, drop the politics, wear a skirt on stage.
What's that shitty show? Entourage?
Yeah.
Sounds like something out of Entourage.
But, art mirrors reality, as they say.
Right.
Yeah, very true.
So yeah, I mean, I've gotten shit for talking politics since I started talking politics, and not even just from the industry, but also from people in my own band, which was also a struggle, like people saying that it's my fault that we haven't gotten further as a band because I won't drop the politics. And that at shows, I demand that there be like a table where a local organization is flyering and shit, like that. I won't let that go. And so again, it's that like weighing of your dreams and your morals, and having to make that choice, unfortunately, most of the time on the side that buries your dreams a little bit deeper every time. And then, with this one too, I even had even after all of those years of writing political music and doing political art, people still saying, oh, is this going to be like a more personal record? And I was like, what is the difference?
Right.
Between, and I'm not, I know that the personal is political has been, it's been bastardized, just like it takes a village to raise a child, but it's true. Like,
right.
It really is political. And so I don't understand when people are like, oh, are you going to go more personal instead? And I'm like, what do you mean instead? Just because I'm not writing a shitty love song about somebody, fucking me and then leaving me, like, it doesn't mean that this isn't personal to me. Like,
right.
And to be perfectly honest, there are good love songs out there already. I feel like that's taken care of. I don't have anything to add to that. So
no, there are plenty. There are plenty. There really are. I mean, listen, there are some really great love songs. I don't mean to like discount love songs. Like, I love music of all kinds, but you're right. There are plenty, and there's not enough, political art in general, political music, I mean, just all of it. There's just not enough, and not even just political, but revolutionary, thinking outside the box, like we need more of that. And we've managed to get society where we conform. I mean, everybody has to conform because you're afraid to stand out. You want to fit in. You don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to take the slings and arrows that are going to come along with, saying things that are unpopular or whatever. We were just talking to Nick from Fred Hampton Leftist yesterday, and people are like afraid to talk about things because they don't want to lose like clicks and subscriptions and whatever. And that's just not I don't want any part of that. That's to me, it's just counterproductive. But we're also seeing it with, I mean, look at Mark Ruffalo walking back his comments on Israel. I mean, it's really across the board. There are just certain things that are taboo. You're not allowed to talk about it. Politics is one of them. You can't talk, and it's the things that we should be talking about. It's like the most important things.
What's probably most egregious about Mark Ruffalo's walk back is that in 2014, he was across the board adamant in his solidarity with Palestinians who were being slaughtered that summer, once again, by Israel. And obviously somebody had to talk with him, and he walked this back. And it's just hideous to see someone who's not just like living in the lap of luxury, even though I think he's a mediocre actor, but in his bio, it says something like proud husband and father. How can you say that and then implicitly support the genocidal slaughter of Palestinian men, women, and children? It's total hypocrisy, and it's just disgusting. And the epitome of the rot, like the political rot that has taken hold in these people aren't even bourgeois, they're above bourgeois. And it's sickening because their platforms are so huge, and people are going to read that and think like, oh, well, Mark Ruffalo, this guy who talks about the climate but doesn't really fucking do anything. oh, well, he's saying this, so it must be true,
Well, yeah, and I think again, like it speaks to capitalism ruining everything. It's his brand.
Mm-hmm.
He is his brand. And so if people come to him and say, "Hey, look, it's hurting your brand to be so pro-Palestine," that becomes a very important consideration as opposed to what's actually based on human rights and liberation and justice.
Right.
And so like this is not uncommon, like that we've seen this in the past with a lot of celebrities who are like, actually never mind that whole thing that I said about human rights, because Nike told me that I shouldn't bring up child labor because they'd use it. So but yeah, and I think like again with the whole artists or musicians or people in sports shouldn't talk politics, that became a shtick because these are the people who need to. I mean, sports are a little bit of a different thing, but artists are the ones who are the mouthpiece for an entire generation. And so if they are in line with the establishment, then the voice of that generation becomes the establishment's voice. We become stenographers for the State Department because of our passive acceptance. And so I think like that whole line has been part of their very like insidious and powerful programming that no, sweeties, you just keep playing your instruments and writing love songs. We'll take care of the politics. Because if you look at, if you look at the advent of punk or the advent of hip hop, that was dangerous because people were listening to those lyrics and being like, yes, burn this shit down. And the establishment was well aware of the power of those of that music, and it wanted to combat it. And so it's in particular very insidious to say to musicians and artists to sit down and shut up, because they are really the people who should be and need to be putting this fight and this fight of the power and the ruling class into songs and into something that you can shout and sing and dance about. That is really what we need. And
yes,
historically, that's what drives movements. Art is not going to burn down a building, but it'll inspire the people who do.
yes.
And I think that like that's so incredibly important, and the establishment is well aware of that, and that's where this shtick comes from, that you should just, as an artist, sit down and shut up.
Well, and I'm also going to do what I always do and bring it back to narrative management, because that's kind of my thing. But this all comes back to narrative management. They use music, they use art, they use movies for propaganda, and that's why they manufacture it, and that's why it's cookie cutter, because they have a narrative that they want to push, and that's really the front line of everything. I mean, this is the fight against propaganda, and just the ability to think freely and have thoughts and read things and hear things and know things and have conversations. That's where it all starts.
A perfect Hollywood example of that is the movie Zero Dark 30. The main consultant for that film, if you want to be so generous as to call it a film, was the CIA.
Yeah, I mean, look at every Marvel movie, all the superhero movies.
Right. These are mostly indoctrination spectacles. That's what they are. They're same with video games. They're used to indoctrinate children. Same thing with the military displays at sports events. They're used to indoctrinate children and get them to think growing up that, not only is the military normal, but it's to be lionized, and it's our only protection against our freedoms, to quote George Bush's pluralization of the word. But it's, they do it with music too. And it's, even if it's not intentional, a bland song it takes something from you. It takes something from your intelligence, and it makes you think too, if that's mostly what you're exposed to, that's what music is. And, again, like you said, Eleanor, that, yeah, it's more of, it's to give the message, like shut up, just do your thing. If you want to create art, but don't be a rabble rouser, because first of all, it's dangerous, but they won't tell you that. But second of all, they want to market something that's safe because that's all that's going to sell.
Yeah, and it's really like, if you think about it, it's really the antithesis of what art is, because art is supposed to ask the difficult questions, you know, comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. And so for someone to say, here are the confines within which you're allowed to create art, that doesn't make any sense. Then that's not art. Then that's something that you've given me, like, you know, a coloring book where I get to color inside the lines. But you wouldn't call that art. And so I think, like, and that's it really just kills the concept of art. And that's the other thing with art, is that, you know, pulling from a book called The Gift, art chafes against the concept of capitalism, because art is something you do because you have to. And art is something you appreciate and you experience because you have to, because we as humans need to connect. It's in our hierarchy of needs, and art is a way to connect. You know, like I said, it's like it's a call out via a film or a song or a poem. And if that is capitalized on, then it automatically becomes inhumane. And so therefore you're already sucking the life out of it, and it becomes, and this is, I think this is why people don't really interact with art on the same level anymore. They will just turn something on Spotify. They won't be moved by it. As opposed to if you go to some like kick-ass gallery that's like full of like street artists and, you know, street urchins or whatever, and you're like, holy shit, this like just destroyed me. Or you see this movie, or you see this band in like a dive bar, and you're like, that was the most exotic, awesome experience of my life. But you don't get that from just flipping on Spotify. And I think that there is like a chasm that people are experiencing because the lack of that connection that is created through art, which is totally something that you can't commodify. You can't capitalize on the feeling you get in a mosh pit. Like, there is no way to put a price tag on that. And so I think like that too is something that they really try to shut up and shut down and try to replace with vapidity. But it's like watching porn as opposed to, you know, making love to someone you really care about. It's like, well, it's not ever going to be the same thing, and it's not ever going to mean anything on a human level.
Yeah, especially when you're done watching it, it feels empty as a hole that a coffin's about to go in.
Yeah, that's very true. I know we don't
I'm not against it. I'm just saying.
No, we support all sex workers. Yes, go girl, get it. Or boys, whatever. But yeah, I know we don't have a whole lot more time with you. So we always like to ask about kind of your influences, like who influences you, which I know is like a really hard question to answer, because I'm sure you feel the same way. There's a ton of things that influence you throughout your life. I mean, like things you may not even be cognizant of. So do you have any particular influences that like really stick out to you, that like really have like stuck around for a long time, that have, you know, been influential in your writing process or your music or, you know, whatever?
And let me just add on to that, because I always do this at the end.
Yes,
what has I'm interested in what your experience just as a woman has been like dealing with not just the music industry, but creating the art that you create, which, you know, people in the biz don't want to deal with because it's political, etc.
Yeah. How much time we have?
we do this all the time. We ask like really heavy questions at the end. Like Jesse's known for doing that.
I've been wanting to ask that one, but the thing is that we don't really plan. I mean, we plan for our conversations, but
it's very just free flowing.
Yeah. So.
Totally. Yeah. And I love that. I think it's always better when it's conversational as opposed to, thank you for answering that question. Next question.
I don't do that well.
Good, because that's creepy. And yeah, well, I mean, to the first point, like somebody asked me this recently, what my influences are. And I'm like, well, I mean, if I'd say like Guns N' Roses to Jussi Björling, who was a Swedish tenor. I mean, and that like, and all of the things in between. You know, spoken word artists, you know, Gil Scott-Heron was just recently inducted to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which I mean, about time.
Right.
But I remember I got his The Revolution Will Not Be Televised on vinyl when I was like 23 or 24, and I was like, whoa. And yeah, and I like there's I mean there's so many, and I know it's kind of weird. Like as soon as somebody asks me this question, my brain just goes Pew.
Yeah.
And of course, as soon as I get off the phone with you, I'll be like, oh, I can't believe
that's kind of why I hate asking it, because there is really no way to answer it either. But I'm also like, I am genuinely curious about what people like, what's your favorite band? Do you have a favorite band? What's your favorite song? What's your favorite album? What's your, you know, like I'm always interested in like what influences people the most, especially particularly the artists, because I think that's, you know, you can learn a lot about a person by who they hold most dear, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's pretty much a truism at this point that as you get older, you expand your palette of music. So, for example, like I grew up a punk rock slash hip hop kid, both of which I still love. But right now, I'm wearing a Hospital. What is it? Record? No, Productions, and that is Dominic Furnau's label. And he, like, if you listen to his music, it's all instrumental and electronic or whatever you want to call it, but it's really dark, and it's great stuff. I really like it. And what's really cool about it too is that his record titles and his song titles always involve something political, particularly as pertains American foreign policy. So he'll have a title like, I'm just riffing on this, but he does have one close to this. Al Qaeda leader buried at sea, something like that, you know, when bin Laden was supposedly killed and buried at sea. And there's just this really interesting, not necessarily just juxtaposition, but sort of, I don't know, there's an interesting hybrid there where there's the name of the song, and then there's the sounds of the song, the melodies, and the darkness of it. And it's almost like a way to meditate or think about the title of the song without having to hear any words or without having to deal with language. So anyway, the point being that yeah, I'm all over the board too. And I think as you get older, that's just part and parcel of the game if you're really into music. So,
and you know what you just said, like being able to meditate on the song without the lyrics. Like I'm a total lyricist, but at the same time, you know, Link Wray's Rumble, which was actually outlawed because it sounded so scary, and it sounded so it sounded like, you know, an indigenous uprising, which is kind of what it was. Was, you know, they refused to play it even though it had no lyrics, but the feel of that song, particularly when it came out in like the late 50s, I believe, holy shit, like that, it just exuded this like punk rock many years before punk rock was a thing. And so, I mean, I could never play like that, but he's been an inspiration. And I would tell anyone, like, please go watch the movie Rumble, because it is a fascinating and powerful look at, it's a documentary about the connections between indigenous and African American music and how that basically birthed the blues. And I'd say that too, like the blues have been hugely influential on me as well, because as a history nerd and as somebody who, you know, fell in love with what is now classic rock. I wanted to know, like, okay, who did these people that I think are awesome listen to?
yeah.
And, you know, then you get into the Charlie Pattons, you get into the Son House,
Robert Johnson.
Yeah. And you start like, and you know, the movie Rumble really talks about, okay, well, but where are these sounds coming from? And aren't they really, like, if you really listen to them, you can hear those indigenous chants in there, those indigenous beats, as well, of course, as the beats, particularly from the Western parts of Africa. And it's absolutely fascinating. And you know, I think that has had a tremendous, like a really heavy influence on me. And actually, when I first started working in studios, one of the sessions that I assisted on was Willie Dixon's grandson. And folks might not know who that is, but if you know Led Zeppelin, then you know Willie Dixon, because he wrote most of their damn songs and never got credit for it. So sorry if you're a fan of Led Zeppelin, but they're kind of assholes because they stole Willie Dixon's songs and then never gave him credit for it until it became like really obvious. And then they were like, fine, yeah, he wrote them.
Every time I see Robert Plant, like old footage of him with like no shirt on or like some shitty like denim vest open, so like he can expose his upper corpus for the women to delight over, I just want to punch him in the goddamn face. He's so annoying. He's so annoying. And Jimmy Page I find equally annoying, although he didn't expose himself as much. But yeah, I'm not a fan of Led Zeppelin. if you can
tell us how you really feel, Jesse.
Yeah. Which is fair, totally fair. But yeah, I mean, like I think working in studios was also a huge influence, and to me that also speaks to how, like, you know, when I'm talking about musical influences, I'd have to say at least like 40% don't have to do with music directly, like that I've heard. They have to do with stories I've heard. They have to do with people that I've met. You know, late night beers on the patio and like talking about life, and because that's what you end up putting into your music, right? That's what you end up putting into your art. My times organizing and you know, being in frontline communities, doing mutual aid, like that is just as much in those songs as, you know, like the birthplace of the blues, and me trying to respectfully you know, carry that torch as a white person. But yeah, I mean, I think like there's a lot in there. And then like I went through a punk phase, you know, like the Germs. I went through a Nordic death metal phase because I'm Swedish. I mean, that's not the only reason, but I was around it. I went through a techno phase. I mean, I was all over the place, and you can't really hear that in the music, but it's in there, like rummaging around, and you know, it's in there causing some havoc, and you know, making me forget where I put my keys and shit. So I mean, like in terms of influences, I certainly don't have like the easy answer, like, well, yes, you can hear clearly in my music the line from my work back to so and so, and I mean, I don't have that. I don't.
Yeah. I totally get that, because it is hard to pinpoint, because again, it's stuff that you may not even be aware of that's influenced you. It may be something that, you know, you're walking through the grocery store and there's some weird like jingle that has like a cool, you know what I mean, and it may just stick in your head for some reason. So yeah, I hate asking that question, but again, I have to, because I am genuinely interested in what people listen to. And you know, because that's I mean, that's how you find new stuff. Like you said, it's, you know, the people that are influencing you, they were influenced by somebody who was influenced by somebody. It's the whole, again, no solo, you know, you're influenced, you're just carrying on the influences of the people who influence you. So yeah, that is like it's kind of like a catch-22. It's one of those weird questions. You have to ask it, but damn it, there's no answer.
Sorry about the dog barking.
That's all right.
But yeah, we don't want to keep you too long, but as I asked, I'm just interested in what kind of pushback you've experienced as a woman, because I feel like that dovetails or is involved very much with the politics we've been talking about.
Totally. And I think like I also identify as a queer woman, and that has made it both better and worse. And I say that because there have been some efforts to, you know, like towards the end of my tenure, I suppose, in LA, there were some shows that were trying to highlight like queer and or femme bands, or at least fronted bands, which was fine, but it started feeling tokeny. Like, hey, we checked this box. Oh, are you the queer femme front person? Great, please come along. And I'm like, I'm like, yes, I am, but I'm also just a singer. Like, I don't want you to like, I don't want to be invited because I check your boxes. I want to be invited because I'm good.
Right.
And that was frustrating. And then, I mean, one of my favorite stories to tell is that we were playing the Viper Room once, And the rest of the band were guys. I mean, still are guys, I think. But at the time also. And we were there for sound check. And so I show up and the door guy looks at me and he's like, girlfriends can't come in yet. Mm. And I was like, sweet, when they get here, I'll be sure to fucking let them know. And if you don't let me in right now, there's not going to be a fucking sound check.
Unbelievable.
Like, that's what, I mean, it's probably like the most overt, but that shit happened like all the time. Like, you know, the front of house guy being like, okay, sweetie, do you want to check your vocals? And I would just fucking stand there and wait till he addressed me, not as, you know, a fucking bag of candy. Mm-hmm. Like something that like my band most of the time backed me up, but every now and then they'd be like, really, do you have to like fight this fight right now? And so I like, you get it from all sides. And then of course, being a tech in studios, you know, people assume that you're a tech can't possibly be a woman. Like, oh, you can read a schematic. Like, I thought that was something only men could do. And so, you know, you'd walk into a studio and say like, yeah, I heard that you know, you're having some problems with the board, and just the range of responses I would get. I mean, there were so many Me Too, like when the Me Too movement started happening, I talked to a friend of mine that used to work at the studio, and she was like, we could bring down so many celebrities if we actually like gave a shit. And true, I mean, we could, I mean, but I'm like, I don't really have the energy to fight that fight publicly. But I've certainly lived it. And it's, you know, the music industry and of course the film industry, because that was a huge part of the Me Too movement, just normalizes this sort of behavior. And then of course gaslights it to the point where if you complain, you're somehow the problem because, oh, you just can't hack it. And if it were a dude, you just accept it. Well, of course, if you were a dude, it wouldn't be said in the first place, but you know, but yeah, I mean, it exists on, like, as I like to say, on both sides of the glass, right? In the control room and in the live room, on stage, backstage. You know, the only time that I've been sexually assaulted happened backstage at a show that I was playing. So it's, you know, it's ubiquitous. And I'd say probably like the worst part is the gaslighting, the feeling that you're not actually experiencing what you're experiencing. And the double standard of you have to make the choice between your morals and your dreams, but as a dude, you don't. Yeah. And this would be a comment that I would get, because it was me going to these meetings with record execs because I was the face of the band, and they'd always say shit like, your band looks great, you know, your lead guitarist is perfect, you know, he looks like a cross between you know, Jimmy Page and Axl Rose or whatever. And I mean, he was good looking, but okay, I mean, well, that's, you know, I've different strokes, but and then they'd say, and you're really attractive, but you need to do more with it. Like, it was enough that his parents were attractive and they fucked and they had him, but apparently not for me. I had to do more with it.
Right.
And that's, you know, that was always the spiel, that, and then somehow that I'm standing in the way of the dreams and aspirations of my band because I refuse to cave and become a Barbie doll. Mm-hmm. And so the pressure, the weight of these decisions is put on the woman, especially if it's, you know, like a mixed gendered band. It's the woman who has to carry the weight of saying no to something severely sexist and fucked up. And yeah, it's hugely problematic. And I'm glad to be out of it, even though, I mean, I'm still making music, but at this point I'm not in that world so much anymore. And I don't want to go back because it's
toxic. It's incredibly toxic.
And the fact is, you don't need those fuckers to make good music. No. You can make good music on your own. If you want to be a careerist, then you need them. But if you're a genuine, sincere musician, then it's not about being a career. It's not about making money. It's about making the music and making it.
And it wouldn't be me anyway. You know, if it was me sitting in a Hollywood Hills home right now, watching my new music video wearing fishnets and with, you know, a new tit job, that just wouldn't be me. So whose life am I living?
That's where Ryan Adams is right now.
But you're right, though. It like totally it dehumanizes you. You're no longer yourself. You are a product. You become a product. They just turn you into something that they can make profit on. And I'm sure that I'm sure that the abuse and harassment that you get is probably significantly more, given that you are political and, you know, you're a woman. How dare you have opinions? You know, just sit there and look pretty, you know? Yeah. So that's,
keep your mouth shut.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really unfortunate. It's the year 2021 and we're still in that space.
Oh yeah. And there was never a shortage, because we used to perform with American flags on stage, and I'd periodically step on the flag. Because it's a piece of fabric, everyone. Right. Like, let's all just calm the fuck down.
Right.
Yes. But there was always, you know, like YouTube comments and all of this shit, like, I hope you get raped, and, you know, all of that stuff, that was specific to my anti-American sensibilities, that weren't there for, you know, I did shows like for money that I would do, like, you know, cover shows where you just sing cover songs for like 2 hours, and never a problem there because I'm playing nice. I'm singing the shit that people have heard for 40 years. I'm certainly not stepping on flags or anyone's toes or, you know, wounded feelings. And so it's definitely like, it's definitely tied to the vehemently opinionated woman who's also intellectual, you know, like, this also hurts a wounded pride that believes that, you know, women should be hot and, you know, sing with push-up bras on, which I actually don't even know how you do, because that really like hurts the diaphragm. So I don't even know how that works, but, you know, mazel tov to the people who can do it. But yeah, it was definitely like me being political only exacerbated the shit that I had to deal with, for sure.
Yeah,
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I can imagine.
But I will say, like, all that shit being said, like, I wouldn't change it. I mean, I wouldn't change my choices. Like, I love that I spent 10 years in LA. I love the experiences, from like the shitty ones, you know, the back alley band fights at 4 a.m, to the brilliant ones where you're in studio and you're like, I think I just saw God because that moment was amazing. Like, I will take all of that, and I regret none of it. I regret things that I saw and things that happened, but my choices I don't regret. And I, you know, so unpacking that has a lot to do with like the shit that was happening around me, but also feeling like, you know what, I feel good about the choices that I made, even though they weren't always like right or right for me. But I feel good about them, and I feel good about where I am today, and I wouldn't be here without those choices. So all of that being said, I'm still proud of what I created. I'm proud of what I was a part of, and I wouldn't trade it.
Right
yeah.
on.
And that's all you can control is your own personal choices. You can't control anybody else or anything else. So yeah. And just your reaction to things that happen to you and how you handle them. That's really all you can do. But I super appreciate you coming on the show. I've been a fan of yours for a long time. So it's been really cool to talk to you. We love talking to musicians. We like it. Usually we're talking about like genocide or the torture of journalists or whatever. So it's fun to like talk about art, and, you know, even though some of your pieces are darker or whatever, it's still fun to like talk about the creative process and how we can use that in a revolutionary way, because you're right, it does absolutely have direct influence on where we're headed. So I super appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Where's the best place that you would say, is it your website where they can find the album? Is that the best spot to get it, I would guess?
Yeah, I'd say, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I love all of the stuff that y'all do, and
thanks for joining us.
I like your Twitter is like that's yeah, I like wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh well, at least she's still around.
For now.
So yeah, I'd say that for folks, like, yes, the album, because necessity, is on iTunes and Spotify, so you can listen to it there. But please, if you like it, please purchase it at artkillingapathy.com, because Spotify and iTunes fucking railroad artists. So we exist there like we exist in capitalism because we have to, but we don't get anything from it. So please do purchase at artists' actual websites, and mine is artkillingapathy.com.
Art Killing Apathy?
Yes.
Okay, just to make sure, so we can put it in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll definitely put that in the show notes. And then you also do a ton of other things. Is there anything else you want to plug? Do you want your show with Lee, or anything that, I mean, I would want people to, or we can just link to everything, whatever.
I mean, everything is at artkillingapathy.com. The link to my film, Hard Road of Hope, is up there. I have 3 podcasts, one that I do with Lee Camp called Common Censored, one that I do with Carla Bergman called Silver Threads, and one that I do on my own called Act Out. All of that's linked there, as well as, photojournalism and journalism. So yeah, you can just, it pairs well with a glass of wine.
Shop.
So like grab a glass, go hang out there, click around,
Yeah, definitely. Everybody should definitely check it out. Again, thank you so much for coming on. You're welcome back anytime. And yeah, we'll just catch everybody next time. Thanks for watching, guys. See you later.